We are back with our head-to-heads, and this time we have gone massive. We're not talking Auntie Liz versus Uncle Oz. We're talking ZYDRUNAS SAVICKAS, Big Z versus the one and only Brian Shaw. Right, Lizzie, this is a really epic one. Possibly the two of the greatest of all time, and they did clash. There was a period of time where they were both the absolute dominant forces in the sport. Obviously, ZYDRUNAS started, you know, way before Brian, but there was a period in the middle there where they just absolutely dominated Strongman.
There was a period in the middle where no one else could get a look in. It was 8 years, 8 consecutive years, these men won the World's Strongest Man title. 8 years!
They are, without question, two of the greatest of all time, and to actually clash in the same era, this is going to be an exciting one.
Okay, Lozzie, so the usual rules apply. I am going to list the competitions that these guys have gone head-to-head in, and you are going to guess who came out on top, and we're going to have a little tally. So you are going to be ZYDRUNAS, and I will be Brian. Okay, so first, a little bit of backstory. The first time these guys met in competition was in the 2009 Fortissimus. Now, up until that point, Brian was a couple of years into his strongman career. He'd mostly been competing in the Strongman Super Series, and he'd done a couple of America's Strongest Man and one World's Strongest Man, 2008. I'm sure you remember that one.
I remember it well.
But he didn't make the final. So 2009 Fortissimus was the first time they saw each other head to head.
Okay.
ZYDRUNAS, meanwhile, he was already a 6 times consecutive winner of the Arnold Strongman Classic.
That's crazy.
And he was a 2-time IFSA champion also. And he was 13 years into his strongman career. 13 years. Most men would never have a 13-year strongman career.
That's crazy. He was 13 years into his career before he competed against Brian Shaw.
Yes. Brian already had a couple of international competition wins under his belt, but ZYDRUNAS was an 8-time major title holder at this point. So they were at very different parts of their career, very different stages. So then, Lozzie, do you care to guess how 2009 Fortissimus went and who came out on top? I have a feeling you'll get this right.
I'm pretty sure ZYDRUNAS comes out on top on this one. Is this the year ZYDRUNAS was second?
No.
No, he won this one.
Yes.
Okay, so ZYDRUNAS was first. Brian, I don't know where Brian placed, but I know ZYDRUNAS was ahead.
Brian came third, so he did well.
It's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And was Derek Poundstone second?
Yes, he was. Well done. Good start for you. Nice start. I think you'll do well on this one because
I should do.
These aren't, for the most part, they're not obscure competitions. Brian didn't compete a lot. Like later in his career, he just concentrated on the major shows. So I'm sure you're going to do quite well with this little guessing game.
We'll see.
So 2009 World's Strongest Man, Group 2. ZYDRUNAS and Brian were put in the same group as each other.
That's crazy.
The poor sods who were also in that group.
Could you imagine being one of the other guys and you're in a group with Brian and ZYDRUNAS?
I mean,
you just go home.
Well, it's not like it was Brian 5 years down the line, though.
No,
do you know what I mean? He didn't have the track record, but he was still a very dominant strongman. So yeah, it definitely would have sucked. Yeah. Do you know how it went, Lozzie? Who won the group? We know only 2 men get through.
Are we including groups then?
When they're head to head, yes. If they're in the same group.
ZYDRUNAS.
Yeah, ZYDRUNAS won the group and Brian was second. Yeah. So this was back in the good old days where all athletes in the group stages did all 6 events, and ZYDRUNAS and Brian won 4 out of those 6 events. But the other 2 events were won by Mark Felix on the deadlift for reps, and Stefan Solby Peterson won the cake toss.
Impressive to beat Brian and ZYDRUNAS on cake toss.
Yeah. And at that point, no one was beating Mark on the deadlift for reps. So
Mark, he's had some good deadlift performances.
He has. Which leads us nicely into the 2009 World's Strongest Man final.
And the 2009 World's Strongest Man final was won by ZYDRUNAS.
It was indeed. And Brian Shaw placed?
Third.
Yeah.
And this was ZYDRUNAS' first World's Strongest Man win.
Yes, it was, after coming back from IFSA. So this year was a really big deal because obviously we'd had the split.
Yeah.
Mariusz Pudzianowski had been absolutely dominating World's Strongest Man. He placed second, by the way.
Yeah.
And it was the first time we were going to see all the top guys together in years and years. So it was a really big deal. It was like if you imagine say the Arnold and the World's Strongest Man split off and the athletes could only compete in one or the other.
It was a big deal. All the best guys coming back together and ZYDRUNAS coming out on top.
After that then we had the 2010 Arnold Strongman Classic. So this was Brian's first appearance at the Arnolds. How do you think they did?
I think ZYDRUNAS won 2010 Arnolds.
Actually, Derek Poundstone won.
ZYDRUNAS won out of Brian and ZYDRUNAS.
That's right. ZYDRUNAS placed second and Brian was fifth. Okay, so this is a juicy one. The 2010 World's Strongest Man Final.
Oh, the 2010 World's Strongest Man Final. Controversy. And ZYDRUNAS winning again.
Yeah.
And rule changes.
Yeah, so in this competition, ZYDRUNAS and Brian tied for first place with 51.5 points each. Now, back then, it went on countback. So when you're tied for points, it would go on who has won the most events overall. But that was a draw also. So they both won 2 first places and they had tied for first place with each other on the deadlift. So then they had to go to second place wins and Brian didn't have any second places and ZYDRUNAS had 1. So overall, which is why ZYDRUNAS took the win and not Brian.
But Brian won the stones.
Brian won the stones. So based on the newer rules that they introduced, Brian would have won overall. But based on the rules at that time...
Because of that contest, they changed the rules to the winner of the last event.
They did. And it's been a bit of a controversial one with fans recently. Now, a lot of people prefer countback. They think overall performance is the best way to judge it. As we've seen at recent Giants live shows where Novikov and Evan tied on points, but it ended up coming down to the stone, so Evan took the win. However, Giants Live did explain that the reason for the rule change was that Joe Public, watching it at Christmas time, who doesn't really follow Strongman at all, couldn't get their head around countback. So apparently countback, in that instance where they ended up having to go back to second place, was maybe a bit too complicated. What do you think?
I don't think Joe Public's that
important.
No, I was going to say stupid.
Oh.
Joe Public's very important.
Oh, sorry.
Because they're people that watch the most views.
I think I've just shared my thoughts.
I think people are more than intelligent enough to figure it out. There's more complicated sports out there.
But there you go, consecutive wins for ZYDRUNAS and maybe a little bit of a bitter taste in the mouth for poor Brian.
Maybe this is motivating Brian.
Wow, let's see how it goes after that. So later that same year, we had the Giants Live Istanbul. Do you remember?
Yes.
You were in it?
I was there.
Yeah.
I was there.
Okay, and as were ZYDRUNAS and Brian, do you remember the final results?
I know that I was 4th and Stefan Solvi Pettersson was 3rd. Mm-hmm. And I think ZYDRUNAS was 2nd and Brian was 1st.
No. So Brian was 2nd, ZYDRUNAS was 1st.
Okay.
That was
How do I not remember these?
That was the year of the Axel World Record.
The Axel World Records. I had the Axel World Record for about a minute and ZYDRUNAS went and broke it.
Did he take it up to 2:14 on that day?
2:15. So I think Brian did 1:95. I did 2:05. And ZYDRUNAS did 2:15.
Didn't Paul Peugeot do that as well and do really well on the Axel?
He did 1:95.
He was only like 12, wasn't he? Right then, new year, possibly a new Brian. So 2011 Arnold Strongman Classic.
2011 was a good year for Brian. I think Brian wins the Arnolds for the first time.
That's right. So not only does he win his first really major title, but it's the first time he beats ZYDRUNAS. That must have felt good.
I bet it did.
After coming second to him a few times at this point, do you think maybe this was a turning point?
Oh, I think that 2010 World's Strongest Man was the turning point.
Yeah. So from one huge show to the next, 2011 World's Strongest Man Final.
Well, I remember this one very well. It was my personal best performance at World's Strongest Man. And Brian Shaw took the win. A very good year for Mr. Brian Shaw, taking the Arnolds and World's Strongest Man ahead of ZYDRUNAS.
That's right. And ZYDRUNAS was in second place. So those two were always so close. So close.
So 2011 was an amazing year for Brian.
Yes. So we go then into 2012, the Arnold Strongman Classic.
2012 Arnold Strongman Classic. Right. I think... Does Brian win this again?
No, it was won by Mike Jenkins.
Oh, of course it was.
Of course it was. You were there.
I was there.
You were there. You're just thinking Brian or ZYDRUNAS, aren't you?
Yes, but I think Brian... No, now that I think about it, I think ZYDRUNAS beats Brian.
ZYDRUNAS does beat Brian.
Yeah.
Well done, yeah. But ZYDRUNAS didn't come second. That was Derek Poundstone.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
ZYDRUNAS was third. Brian was fourth.
That's right.
So then we go into the 2012 World Strongest Man final.
2012 World's Strongest Man. This was the first year I missed due to injury. But I believe ZYDRUNAS wins. ZYDRUNAS wins.
You nearly changed it.
And Lalas was second.
Lalas was second.
Yes.
Lalas nearly won
He
until
did.
it got to the Power Stairs as the final event. Not that I'm complaining about having Power Stairs as the final event. I think that would be amazing.
He did really well that year.
Yeah. Can you remember where Brian placed?
Was he third?
He was fourth.
Fourth.
Yeah,
Okay.
fourth overall. So 2 fourth places. And
That was the year Brian had some kind of nerve issue with his hand.
yeah, so those were actually the only 2 competitions that Brian did that year. And this just goes to show how vastly different their careers were as well. Because I looked it up. ZYDRUNAS competed 16 times in 2012.
Wow.
16.
He did a lot of contests.
Yeah.
Won most of them as well.
Yeah, he did. It's just crazy. Next was the 2013 World's Strongest Man final in Sanya, everyone's favourite place.
So 2013 World's Strongest Man.
Yeah.
Brian Shaw wins.
Yeah, Brian does win. Well done. It was... I always find when I'm remembering the World's Strongest Man winners, from the beginning up until the ZYDRUNAS and Brian era, I find it really easy, but then I always forget which ones those guys won.
Yeah, they're
because
so
it was
back and
chop
forth.
and change, yeah. And do you remember where ZYDRUNAS placed?
Probably second.
Yeah, he was second. Then we have the 2014 Arnold Strongman Classic.
Oh, 2014 Arnold Strongman Classic was won by ZYDRUNAS.
Yes, it was. Can you remember where Brian placed?
Second.
Yes. Yeah, he was second.
They were so back and forth at this point in their career.
And so dominant as
Yeah.
well.
Oh, yeah.
It really sucked. And you're included in this list of athletes. But for the other guys upcoming, I mean, Thor is a great example. Between 2012 and 2016, he was on that podium every time at World's Strongest Man, but he just couldn't get a sniff because of Brian and ZYDRUNAS.
Yeah.
And next up is the 2014 World's Strongest Man final.
And this one was won by ZYDRUNAS.
It was, yeah.
With Brian Shaw just behind.
He was in third place.
Was he?
Yeah.
Oh.
There was a cock up on the stones.
That's
do you remember?
right.
Yeah.
Mike Burke's stone platform fell
It
or
went
something.
flying, yeah.
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 And Brian was distracted by it.
Yeah. It was a little bit tense after that. Do you remember?
It was.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember the podium photo.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't forget a podium
No,
photo like
no,
that.
no.
Although I haven't been able to find it. I don't know if there's some sort of conspiracy. I desperately tried to find it for the purpose of this video, but it's
There you go. If anyone's got it, send it to Auntie Liz.
a collector's item now. Now, a nice change of scene. Next, they were together in Brazil at the 2014 Força Bruta. Now, I don't claim to know much about this competition, but I know it only had 3 events and a few athletes.
Yeah, I don't think they've ever got many athletes at it.
No, very strange.
I
Do you know who
can't
won?
remember. I'm going to guess ZYDRUNAS.
Yeah, so ZYDRUNAS did win and Brian was second, so yeah. Next, the 2015 Arnold Strongman Classic.
2015 Arnold Strongman Classic was won by Brian Shaw.
Yes, it was. And ZYDRUNAS was...
Second.
Yeah, this is a safe bet. I guess the other was second.
Yeah.
And then the 2015 World's Strongest Man final.
This was a disappointing year for me, so I can't remember it that well.
We went home.
Yes. 2015 World's Strongest Man was won by Brian Shaw.
Yes. And ZYDRUNAS was...
Second.
Yes. 2015's Força Bruta, or whatever it's bloody called.
They're competing there again. Let's
Yeah,
go
they
Brian.
went back. Yeah,
I'm
it
just
was
guessing
Brian.
now.
No, it was Brian. And ZYDRUNAS came third.
Ah.
Oh.
Controversy.
Yeah. So then the 2016 Arnold Strongman Classic. Now, do you remember 2016 ZYDRUNAS?
Yeah, he wasn't in great shape, was he?
This was when he suffered some severe nerve damage, and was it his shoulder or his back?
Yeah, and it was like causing him issues with his deadlift and all sorts.
Do you remember we saw him in the Faroe Islands, and he was tiny, wasn't he? He was like little Z.
Yeah, yeah.
But before that, we had the Arnold Strongman Classic in 2016.
And 2016, Arnold's winner was ZYDRUNAS.
It was ZYDRUNAS.
And he shocked everyone, because didn't he come like last or almost last on the deadlift?
Something like that.
And then ended up winning the show.
Yeah, it was...
everyone had written him off.
Yeah.
And I think he just blitzed the rest of the show.
Yeah.
You can never count out ZYDRUNAS. I should know this myself.
Yeah, you should. Do you care to guess where Brian placed?
Second.
He did place second, yeah. So the reason I mentioned ZYDRUNAS and his injuries was because he skipped Worlds that year. So that was the first time in a long time we hadn't seen ZYDRUNAS at Worlds. So moving on to the 2017 World's Strongest Man final was the next time we saw them together.
2017 World's Strongest Man. ZYDRUNAS made the final, but he wasn't in great shape.
No.
I think he came last or pretty much
He
bottom.
came ninth. Yeah.
And obviously Eddie Hall won that year. And I think Brian Shaw was...
Imagine the podium picture, Lozzie. Which side does he stood on?
Brian Shaw was third.
Yeah, well done.
And Thor was second.
Oh, don't. Don't even.
So this was a bit of a changing of the guards here. ZYDRUNAS and Brian not so dominant now.
No, both having suffered injuries at this point. Brian, most notably at the Arnold Strongman Classic, and ZYDRUNAS with his nerve issues. Yeah, they were starting to not wane, but...
Still great athletes, but just look more human.
A little bit more human.
A little bit more beatable.
Yeah. Then we have the 2018 World's Strongest Man final. So a full year has passed. And they meet again.
And 2018 World's Strongest Man winner was Thor. I think Brian Shaw was on the podium.
He was.
And again, I don't think it was such a good year for ZYDRUNAS.
It wasn't. So ZYDRUNAS did make the final, but he came 10th.
Yeah.
And Brian was third in that competition. And that was actually the end of an era. That's the last time they've both been in the World's Strongest Man final together. 2018. It's quite sad.
It is sad, but you look at that dominant period of where they just 8 years in a row, they won the title. One of them won the title. Normally the other one was second if they didn't win. You know, imagine if they competed in a different era, how many titles they could potentially have won.
Or imagine if the other one didn't exist. Or does the other one existing make the other one better?
I think having that rivalry pushed them to new levels.
Yeah.
And it pushed all the other guys. Like, the sport has evolved so much now, and it's largely thanks to guys like those that they just made everyone else get better.
Then they had a nice little change of scene at the 2018 World Ultimate Strongman in Dubai.
The World Ultimate Strongman in Dubai, again, ZYDRUNAS not doing so well at this point in his career. Brian Shaw ending up on the podium. I think Brian was third.
He was second.
Second. He was second. Thor was the winner. And I think even I placed higher than ZYDRUNAS in that one.
You came fifth. You did well.
Fifth. I can't even remember where ZYDRUNAS was.
ZYDRUNAS was 10th in that.
Okay, there you go. I never like seeing ZYDRUNAS 10th in a competition. It makes me very sad.
I feel like I should do some Brian quotes, but I don't know how to fit them in. Ask me a question.
Do you want to go on a date with me on the weekend?
Well, that's a great question. That's a terrible Brian impression. Well, that's no, I can't. And finally, what do you think is going to be the next one?
This year's Shaw Classic.
Yes, well done. Yeah, the 2021 Shaw Classic. I thought you might have forgotten.
No, that was only a few weeks ago. And ZYDRUNAS pulled out after day one.
Yeah.
Brian Shaw ending up second overall. Brian gets the win over ZYDRUNAS. So where does that leave us?
Look down and you'll see.
Oh, yes. So there we have it, the head-to-head with two of the greatest of all time. And you can argue either way about who you feel is the best. For me, it's always going to be ZYDRUNAS. You know, he's got such a long career. He's won so many titles. He's got so many records. You know, I know you've got some facts on them, but they're both absolutely incredible athletes.
Yeah.
And it was a pleasure and a nightmare at times to be able to compete against them both in their prime.
They both approached their strongman careers in very different ways. Brian did as few contests as possible some years, whereas ZYDRUNAS was just competing week in, week out. It was actually crazy. So you mentioned the stats, I've got some for you. So we have record of ZYDRUNAS having done 140 international competitions, and he won 76 of them.
That's mental.
76! Brian did far fewer. He did 61 international competitions so far. Obviously, he's still competing.
Of course, yep.
And he won 26 of them. But those are still mostly made up of pretty big titles, you know.
Arnold's World's Strongest Man titles. He's won some very big ones.
He's won some big shows. Well, he's won everything there is to win. The only person that comes close, anywhere near close, and it's not even close, to ZYDRUNAS's record of the most international competition wins is Mariusz Pudzianowski, who has won 42.
Wow.
But that's not exactly close to 76.
It's still amazing, but yeah, 76 international wins is absolutely insane. And when you think 6 of those were world titles, 8 of them were Arnold Classic wins. It was a fun head-to-head to look at. 2 of the absolute greatest of all time. Let us know your favourites, and of course, as always, let us know who you'd like to see on the head-to-heads. While you're here, guys, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of my awesome strength content.